Welcome to the Rainy Night Storyteller. In this quiet space, where the rain whispers like secrets in the dark, I will guide you through chilling tales of mystery and horror. Turn off the lights, settle into your favorite spot, and let the soothing sound of the rain carry you into a world of the unknown. Before we dive into tonight's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep the rain falling and the stories coming. Are you ready? Let's begin the tale. The Haunting of the Black Dahlia, Los Angeles, 1947. A city caught between the lingering shadows of war and the neon promise of a burgeoning future. The streets buzzed with the hum of streetcars and the chatter of hopefuls chasing the Californian dream. Yet, beneath the glitz of Hollywood and the sunlit boulevards lay a city grappling with its own darkness. John Anderson, a man in his early 30s, bore the unmistakable mark of a life lived on the edge. His chiseled features were often shadowed by the brim of a fedora, and his gray eyes held stories few dared to uncover. A former Marine, John had seen the brutal theaters of the Pacific, experiences that left invisible scars more profound than any physical wound. Returning to civilian life, he found solace in the familiar rhythm of investigation, setting up a modest office as a private detective in downtown Los Angeles. The city was in flux. The end of the war had brought a surge of veterans seeking normalcy, leading to a housing boom and the rapid expansion of suburban neighborhoods. Yet, this growth was juxtaposed against rising unemployment rates, with California experiencing an 8.8% unemployment rate in 1946 compared to the national average of 3.9%. California State Capitol Museum. The disparity between the glittering facade and the gritty reality was stark. John's office, a small room on the second floor of a brick building, overlooked the bustling streets below. The scent of tobacco and aged paper filled the space, a testament to countless hours spent poring over case files. The door, adorned with frosted glass, bore the simple inscription, John Anderson, Private Investigator. One rainy evening, as the city lights blurred into a mosaic of colors against the wet pavement, John sat at his desk, nursing a glass of bourbon. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the window was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," John called out, his voice carrying the weight of fatigue. The door creaked open to reveal a woman in her mid-20s, drenched from the rain. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes, though weary, held a determined glint. "Mr. Anderson?" she inquired, her voice trembling slightly. "That's me. How can I help you?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and handed him a damp envelope. "I need your help. My sister, Elizabeth Short, was murdered, and the police, they've got nothing." The name struck a chord. Elizabeth Short, dubbed the Black Dahlia by the press, had been found murdered in a vacant lot, her body mutilated and posed in a grotesque manner. The case had become a media sensation, yet leads were scarce, and the investigation had stalled. John gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, miss." Virginia Short." "All right, Virginia. Tell me everything you know." As she recounted the events leading up to her sister's disappearance, John listened intently, piecing together the fragments of Elizabeth's life. A young woman with dreams of Hollywood stardom, Elizabeth had moved through the city's social circles, often seen at clubs and parties, mingling with a variety of characters. The LAPD had questioned numerous suspects, from jealous lovers to shady acquaintances, but the trail had gone cold. Public pressure mounted, and conspiracy theories flourished, yet the truth remained elusive. Taking on the case meant delving into the city's underbelly, confronting its darkest corners. But for John, it was more than just another job. It was a chance to seek justice for a young woman whose dreams had been brutally shattered, and perhaps in doing so, find a semblance of redemption for himself. As Virginia left the office, leaving behind a photograph of Elizabeth, a striking young woman with dark hair and an enigmatic smile, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He extinguished his cigarette, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the rain-soaked streets, ready to follow the trail wherever it might lead. The city, with all its secrets and lies, awaited him. As John Anderson delved deeper into the life of Elizabeth Short, he began by retracing her final known movements. Elizabeth, an aspiring actress, had been a familiar face in the vibrant nightlife of Los Angeles, often seen frequenting popular establishments and mingling with a diverse crowd. John's first stop was the Biltmore Hotel, the last place Elizabeth was reportedly seen alive. The hotel's opulent lobby, adorned with ornate chandeliers and marble floors, contrasted starkly with the grim purpose of his visit. He approached the front desk, flashing his investigator's badge. "Good evening," John began. "I'm looking into the whereabouts of Elizabeth Short prior to her death. I understand she was last seen here." The receptionist, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. Miss Short was here on the evening of January 9th. She mentioned meeting her sister, but we didn't see her leave. Did she meet anyone else during her stay?" "Not that I'm aware of," the receptionist replied. "She mostly kept to herself, sitting in the lobby." Thanking the man, John made a mental note to verify the information. His next destination was the Crown Grill, a nearby bar where Elizabeth was known to socialize. The Crown Grill was a dimly lit establishment, filled with the haze of cigarette smoke and the murmur of patrons. John approached the bartender, a burly man polishing a glass. "Evening," John greeted, sliding a photo of Elizabeth across the counter. "You recognize her?" The bartender glanced at the photo and nodded. "Yeah, that's Beth. She was a regular here, always friendly, chatting with everyone. Do you recall if she had any trouble with anyone? Maybe someone who took too much interest in her?" The bartender frowned, thinking, "There was this one guy, always hanging around her. Gave me the creeps. Tall, dark hair, always wore a suit. Don't know his name, though." John jotted down the description, feeling a lead forming. He decided to visit the morgue next, hoping the coroner's report might offer more insights. At the Los Angeles County Morgue, the coroner, Dr. Malcolm Green, greeted John with a firm handshake. "Mr. Anderson, I've been expecting you. The Short case is unusual." "Unusual how?" John inquired. Dr. Green led him to a sterile examination room, pulling out a file. Her body was severed at the waist, a method called a hemicorporectomy. It's a precise procedure taught in the 1930s. The body was also drained of blood and cleaned, indicating the crime occurred elsewhere. "Any signs of a struggle?" "None," Dr. Green replied. "No defensive wounds. She was likely incapacitated before the mutilation." As John left the morgue, the weight of the case pressed heavily on him. The meticulous nature of the crime suggested a perpetrator with medical knowledge. The description from the bartender pointed to a possible suspect. Yet, the lack of concrete evidence made the path forward murky. Determined, John decided to compile a list of medical professionals in the area, focusing on those with surgical expertise. He also planned to revisit Elizabeth's acquaintances, hoping to uncover more about the mysterious man who had shown an unsettling interest in her. The city of Los Angeles, with its glitz and glamour, masked a darkness that John was now deeply entrenched in. As he navigated the labyrinth of leads, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the perpetrator was always a step ahead, lurking in the shadows. Undeterred, John pressed on, vowing to bring justice to Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and to unearth the truth hidden beneath the city's shimmering facade. As John Anderson delved deeper into the investigation of Elizabeth Short's murder, he found himself entangled in a web of secrets and lies that permeated the underbelly of Los Angeles. The city's glitz and glamour masked a darkness that few dared to confront. One evening, as John was sifting through old case files in his dimly lit office, the phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the silence. "John Anderson speaking. Mr. Anderson, this is Detective Sam Morales from LAPD. We've met before at the precinct." John recalled the stern-faced detective with a reputation for being both thorough and relentless. "Of course, Detective Morales. What can I do for you?" I heard you're looking into the Black Dahlia case. Thought you might want to know we've had a break. A witness has come forward claiming to have seen Elizabeth with a man matching the description you provided. John's pulse quickened. Where can I find this witness? Meet me at the Blue Parrot Lounge on 5th Street in an hour. We'll talk there. The Blue Parrot Lounge was a smoky, dimly lit bar frequented by those who preferred to keep their dealings in the shadows. John arrived to find Detective Morales seated in a corner booth, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Evening, Anderson," Morales greeted, gesturing for John to sit. "Detective, what's this about a witness?" Morales leaned in, lowering his voice. A bartender from the Crown Grill came forward. "Says he saw Elizabeth with a man fitting the description you provided. Tall, dark hair, always in a suit. They left together the night she disappeared." John's mind raced. Did he provide any more details? A name, perhaps? No name, but he mentioned the guy had a distinctive scar on his left cheek. John nodded, filing away the information. "I appreciate the tip, Morales." "Be careful, Anderson," Morales warned. "This city has a way of swallowing men whole, especially those who dig too deep." As John left the lounge, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The streets seemed darker, the shadows longer. He decided to pay another visit to the Crown Grill, hoping to gather more information about the mysterious man with the scar. The bartender recognized John and greeted him with a nod. "Back again, Mr. Anderson. What can I do for you?" "I need more information about the man seen with Elizabeth Short," John said, his tone serious. "Anything you can remember could help." The bartender frowned, thinking, well, he always paid in cash, big bills. Didn't talk much, but had this air about him, like he was someone important. Did he ever mention any places he frequented? Other bars, clubs? Now that you mention it, I heard him talk about the Macambo Club once. Said he had business there. The Macambo Club was one of Los Angeles's most exclusive night spots, frequented by celebrities and the city's elite. If the mysterious man was a regular there, it might explain his air of importance. John decided to visit the Macambo Club, hoping to find someone who could identify the man with the scar. The club's opulent interior was a stark contrast to the seedy bars John usually frequented. He approached the hostess, flashing his investigator's badge. "Evening, ma'am. I'm looking for information on a patron. A man with a scar on his left cheek. Tall, dark hair, always in a suit. Ring any bells?" The hostess's eyes widened slightly. I might know who you're talking about. He goes by the name Richard Lawson. Comes in often, always sits in the VIP section. Is he here tonight? She shook her head. Not that I've seen, but he usually comes in on Thursdays. It was Tuesday. John decided to stake out the club on Thursday, hoping to catch a glimpse of Richard Lawson. In the meantime, he dug into Lawson's background, discovering he was a prominent surgeon with ties to the city's elite. A man with the skills necessary to perform the precise mutilations inflicted on Elizabeth Short. Thursday night arrived, and John positioned himself near the entrance of the Macambo Club. Eyes peeled for Lawson. Hours passed, and just as John was about to call it a night, a sleek black car pulled up. A tall man with dark hair and a scar on his left cheek stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket. John's heart pounded as he watched Lawson enter the club. He waited a few minutes before following, slipping inside and taking a seat at the bar with a clear view of the VIP section. Lawson was seated with a group of well-dressed men, laughing and drinking. John observed them for a while, noting how others seemed to gravitate towards Lawson, seeking his attention. It was clear he was a man of influence. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned, and Lawson eventually rose to leave. John followed him outside, keeping a safe distance. As Lawson approached his car, John made his move. "Mr. Lawson, a moment of your time." Lawson turned, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Do I know you?" "Name's John Anderson. I'm investigating the murder of Elizabeth Short." A flicker of recognition crossed Lawson's face, quickly masked by indifference. "I read about that in the papers. Tragic." As John Anderson delved deeper into the investigation, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Richard Lawson was concealing more than he let on. Determined to uncover the truth, John decided to dig into Lawson's background, seeking any connections that might link him to Elizabeth Short. Late one evening, John sat in his dimly lit office, sifting through public records and newspaper archives. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon a photograph in a 1946 society page, a charity gala at the Biltmore Hotel. Among the attendees were Richard Lawson and, to John's surprise, Elizabeth Short, standing just a few feet apart. Intrigued, John visited the Biltmore Hotel the next day, hoping to find someone who remembered the event. He spoke with Margaret, an elderly receptionist who had worked at the hotel for decades. "Excuse me, ma'am," John began, showing her the photograph. "Do you recall this event?" Margaret adjusted her glasses, peering at the image. "Oh yes, that was the annual charity ball in '46. A grand affair. Do you remember seeing these two individuals?" John pointed to Lawson and Elizabeth. She squinted, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember them. They danced together that night. Quite the striking couple." This revelation added a new layer to the investigation. John now had evidence of a prior connection between Lawson and Elizabeth, but he needed more. Determined to gather concrete evidence, John decided to surveil Lawson's residence. For several nights, he observed from a discreet distance, noting the comings and goings. On the third night, he saw a woman enter the house, bearing a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. Concerned for the woman's safety, John approached the house under the cover of darkness. Peering through a window, he saw the woman seated in the living room, looking anxious. Lawson was nowhere in sight. Summoning his courage, John knocked on the door. After a tense moment, the woman answered. "Who are you?" she asked nervously. "Name's John Anderson. I'm a private investigator. Are you here willingly?" She glanced over her shoulder, then whispered, "Please, you have to help me. He's not what he seems." Before she could say more, Lawson's voice echoed from inside. "Who is it, dear?" Thinking quickly, John replied loudly, "Just a salesman, sir. I'll be on my way." As he turned to leave, he slipped his business card into the woman's hand. "Call me when you can," he whispered. That night, John couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He needed solid evidence to bring Lawson to justice. The next morning, he received a call from the woman. "Mr. Anderson, it's Claire. I found something disturbing in his study. Old photographs of Elizabeth Short, letters, and a surgical kit." John's heart raced. "Get out of there now. Go to the police and tell them everything." With Claire's testimony and the evidence she provided, the police obtained a warrant to search Lawson's home. They uncovered more incriminating items, detailed notes about Elizabeth's movements, newspaper clippings about the murder, and medical instruments matching the type used in the crime. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Richard Lawson was arrested and charged with the murder of Elizabeth Short. The trial was a media sensation, uncovering the dark underbelly of Los Angeles' elite. John Anderson's relentless pursuit of justice had finally paid off. As he sat in his office, reflecting on the case, John couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. But he also knew that the city held many more secrets, and there would always be another mystery lurking around the corner. As the trial of Richard Lawson commenced, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, spectators, and legal experts filled the benches, eager to witness the proceedings of a case that had gripped Los Angeles. John Anderson sat quietly, his presence a testament to his relentless pursuit of justice for Elizabeth Short. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Lawson's connection to Elizabeth and the incriminating evidence found in his home. Claire's testimony was particularly damning, painting a picture of a man obsessed and unhinged. The defense, however, countered with claims of circumstantial evidence and questioned the credibility of witnesses. As days turned into weeks, the trial revealed the complexities of the case. Despite the mountain of evidence, the defense managed to cast doubt, highlighting the lack of direct proof linking Lawson to the crime scene. The jury deliberated for days, and in a shocking turn, returned with a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. John felt a wave of frustration and disbelief. How could a man so evidently connected to the crime walk free? As Lawson exited the courthouse, he caught John's eye, offering a smug smile before disappearing into a waiting car. Determined not to let Elizabeth's murder go unresolved, John continued his investigation. He delved deeper into Lawson's past, uncovering a history of malpractice suits and allegations of misconduct that had been quietly settled out of court. It became evident that Lawson had powerful connections shielding him from repercussions. One evening, as John reviewed his notes, he received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have information about Lawson's involvement in other unsolved murders. They agreed to meet at a secluded diner on the outskirts of the city. At the diner, John met a former nurse who had worked with Lawson years prior. She recounted disturbing incidents of patients, mostly young women, who had died under mysterious circumstances. Their deaths were ruled as accidents or natural causes, but she always harbored suspicions. Armed with this new information, John approached Detective Sam Morales, hoping to reopen the investigation. Morales, initially hesitant, agreed to look into the new leads. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern. Lawson had been present in the lives of several women who had met untimely and gruesome ends. With mounting evidence, the LAPD launched a task force to re-examine cold cases linked to Lawson. The media caught wind, and the public outcry pressured the authorities to act. Facing renewed scrutiny, Lawson attempted to flee but was apprehended at the airport. This time, the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with multiple charges and the prospect of a lifetime behind bars, Lawson's demeanor shifted from arrogance to desperation. In a bid for leniency, he confessed to the murders, including that of Elizabeth Short. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief as justice was finally served. John Anderson, though haunted by the horrors he had uncovered, found solace in knowing that Elizabeth's spirit could now rest. The case had taken its toll, but it also reaffirmed his commitment to seeking truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. In the aftermath of Richard Lawson's conviction, Los Angeles began to heal from the scars left by the gruesome murders. The media frenzy gradually subsided, and the city attempted to return to a semblance of normalcy. However, for John Anderson, the case was far from over. One evening, as John was organizing his office, he received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, her demeanor both anxious and determined, introduced herself as Emily Carter, a journalist investigating unsolved homicides in Los Angeles. "Mr. Anderson," she began, "I've been following your work on the Lawson case. I believe there's more to uncover." Intrigued, John invited her to sit. "What do you have in mind?" Emily produced a folder filled with newspaper clippings and photographs. "During my research, I found striking similarities between Elizabeth Short's murder and several other unsolved cases from the past decade. The patterns are too consistent to ignore." As John examined the materials, he noticed the parallels. Young women, all aspiring actresses, found murdered with similar mutilations. The media had dubbed these cases as isolated incidents, but Emily's research suggested a more sinister connection. "Are you suggesting there's another killer out there?" John asked, his brow furrowing. Emily nodded. "Yes, and I believe Lawson was part of a larger network, possibly covering for someone more influential." Determined to uncover the truth, John and Emily formed an unlikely partnership. They revisited old crime scenes, interviewed retired detectives, and delved into archives long forgotten. Their investigation led them to a name that had surfaced briefly during the Lawson trial but was dismissed due to lack of evidence: Dr. George Hodel. Dr. Hodel was a prominent physician in Los Angeles, known for his affluent lifestyle and connections to the city's elite. However, whispers of his dark proclivities had circulated for years. Rumors of clandestine parties, illicit affairs, and a fascination with surrealist art, particularly the works of Man Ray, whose pieces often depicted dismembered women. As John and Emily dug deeper, They discovered that Dr. Hodel had been a prime suspect in several investigations, but had evaded prosecution due to his connections and wealth. Notably, his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired homicide detective, had conducted an independent investigation, presenting compelling evidence linking his father to the Black Dahlia murder. People.com. The pieces began to fit together. Lawson and Hodel had been acquaintances, both moving in the same social circles. It was plausible that Lawson had been an accomplice, or at least complicit in covering up Hodel's crimes. Armed with their findings, John and Emily approached Detective Sam Morales, who had been instrumental in Lawson's arrest. Initially skeptical, Morales couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. He agreed to reopen the investigation, this time focusing on Dr. Hodel. The renewed investigation unearthed chilling details. Witnesses came forward, recounting tales of Hodel's violent tendencies and his obsession with the macabre. A former housekeeper revealed that she had seen Elizabeth Short at Hodel's residence shortly before her death. Despite the compelling evidence, bringing Hodel to justice proved challenging. His connections provided a protective shield, and many were reluctant to testify against such a powerful figure. In a desperate bid to uncover irrefutable evidence, John and Emily decided to search Hodel's abandoned residence, the infamous Soden House. Under the cover of darkness, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, eventually stumbling upon a hidden room. Inside, they found a collection of photographs depicting Elizabeth Short and other women in compromising positions. More disturbingly, there were medical instruments stained with what appeared to be blood. With this damning evidence, the authorities had no choice but to act. Dr. George Hodel was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The trial was a media sensation, revealing the dark underbelly of Los Angeles' elite. As the verdict was read, convicting Hodel on all counts, John felt a sense of closure. The city could finally begin to heal, and the spirits of the victims could rest. For John and Emily, the journey had been arduous, but it reaffirmed their belief in justice and the importance of seeking the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. In the wake of Dr. George Hodel's conviction, Los Angeles grappled with the unsettling revelation that a man of such prominence had perpetrated heinous crimes under the guise of respectability. The city's veneer of glamour was irrevocably tarnished, exposing the shadows lurking beneath its glittering surface. For John Anderson, the conclusion of the case marked both an end and a beginning. While justice had been served for Elizabeth Short and the other victims, the journey had unearthed deeper questions about the nature of evil and the facades people maintain. The case had taken a toll on him, both professionally and personally, leading him to contemplate the true cost of seeking the truth. Emily Carter, whose investigative prowess had been instrumental in cracking the case, found herself at a crossroads. The story had catapulted her career, but it also left her disillusioned with the very society she sought to inform. The realization that such darkness could reside in the hearts of esteemed individuals shook her faith in humanity. As the media frenzy subsided, the city attempted to heal. Memorials were held for the victims, and communities came together to support one another. However, the scars remained, serving as a grim reminder of the horrors that had transpired. John and Emily, having formed a bond through their shared pursuit of justice, decided to collaborate on a book detailing the investigation. They hoped that by shedding light on the truth, they could honor the victims and prevent such atrocities from occurring in the future. As they delved into writing, they uncovered more unsettling information about Hodel's past, including connections to other unsolved murders across the country. The possibility that he had been a serial offender, evading justice for years, added another layer of complexity to their narrative. The publication of their book sparked renewed interest in cold cases, leading authorities to re-examine old evidence with fresh eyes. While not all cases were solved, the effort brought closure to some families and highlighted the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. In the end, the saga of Dr. George Hodel served as a cautionary tale about the duality of human nature and the dangers of unchecked power. It reminded the world that monsters often wear the most convincing masks, and that vigilance is essential in the pursuit of justice. The Ghost of Zodiac, a chilling tale based on true events. The year was 1968. A cold December wind whipped through the streets of Vallejo, California, carrying with it an undercurrent of fear. The festive cheer was dampened by whispers of a shadowy figure, a phantom who had begun to stalk the night. He was known only as Zodiac, a name scrawled at the bottom of cryptic letters sent to the local newspapers, taunting the police and terrorizing the public. Our story follows Detective Michael Anderson, a seasoned homicide investigator with a haunted past. Anderson, a man hardened by years of dealing with the city's darkest corners, found himself facing a case that chilled him to the bone. The Zodiac Killer, as he was dubbed by the press, was unlike any criminal he had ever encountered. He was meticulous, cunning, and seemingly unstoppable. The killer's first victims were a young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, brutally murdered on a lover's lane. The next attack came months later, leaving Darlene Ferrin dead and her boyfriend, Mike Mageau, severely wounded. The killer's modus operandi was as cold-blooded as it was efficient, a swift and brutal execution that left no trace except for a chilling message, a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, the Zodiac signature. As the body count rose, so did the fear. The killer's letters, filled with cryptic ciphers and boasts of future murders, became a source of morbid fascination for the public and a nightmare for law enforcement. Anderson, obsessed with the case, found himself drawn deeper into the killer's twisted game. He spent countless nights poring over the letters, analyzing the ciphers, and chasing down every lead, no matter how tenuous. The investigation led him down a rabbit hole of dead ends and false leads. The killer, like a ghost, seemed to vanish into thin air after each attack, leaving behind only a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Anderson's obsession with the case began to consume him, pushing him to the brink of his sanity. He became withdrawn, haunted by the victims' faces and the killer's taunting letters. One foggy night, while driving home from another fruitless day of investigation, Anderson noticed a car parked on a deserted stretch of road. As he approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a hooded jacket. The man's face was obscured, but Anderson could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. A gun. Time seemed to slow down. Anderson's instincts kicked in. He reached for his own weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure raised the gun, and a shot rang out, piercing the silence of the night. The world exploded in a flash of light and a deafening roar. Anderson stumbled back, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. When he could see again, the figure was gone, vanished into the swirling mist like a phantom. A sharp pain seared through his left arm, and he realized he'd been grazed by the bullet. Cursing, he scrambled for his radio, his voice shaking as he called for backup. The incident shook Anderson to his core. It was no longer just a case. It was personal. The Zodiac had tried to kill him. This realization ignited a fire in him, a fierce determination to bring the killer to justice. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The city held its breath, waiting for the next attack. The Zodiac, however, remained silent. The letters stopped, the ciphers ceased. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. But Anderson knew better. He knew the killer was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. One evening, a cryptic message arrived at the police station, addressed to Anderson. It was a postcard, bearing a single, chilling sentence, "I'm back." Attached to the postcard was a piece of blood-stained fabric, a grim reminder of the killer's last victim. Anderson's blood ran cold. The Zodiac was back, and this time, he was sending a message directly to him. The city plunged back into terror. The newspapers were filled with speculation. The streets were deserted after dark. Anderson, fueled by a mixture of fear and determination, threw himself back into the investigation. He analyzed the postcard, searching for clues, for any hint of the killer's identity or his next target. He revisited the crime scenes, interviewed witnesses, and chased down every lead, no matter how insignificant. He felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong step, and he would fall into the abyss. Then, a breakthrough. A witness came forward, a woman who claimed to have seen the Zodiac near one of the crime scenes. She described him as a man in his late 30s, with a distinctive limp and a military-style haircut. Anderson felt a surge of hope. Could this be the break he had been waiting for? He worked tirelessly, following up on the new lead, piecing together the puzzle. He felt like he was closing in on the killer, that he was finally gaining the upper hand. But the Zodiac was always one step ahead, a master manipulator who reveled in the chaos he created. One night, Anderson received a phone call. It was a distorted voice, a voice he recognized instantly. "Hello, Detective Anderson," the voice hissed. "I've been expecting your call." The Zodiac was on the line. A chill ran down Anderson's spine. The voice, though distorted, was laced with a chilling calmness, a mockery of the terror he was inflicting on the city. "I know you're getting close, Detective," the voice continued, a hint of amusement in its tone, "but you'll never catch me. I'm always one step ahead." Anderson, fighting to maintain his composure, tried to engage the killer in conversation, hoping to buy time for the trace. He asked questions, trying to glean any information he could, any clue that might lead him to the Zodiac's location. But the killer was elusive, his answers cryptic and taunting. He toyed with Anderson, reveling in his power, in the fear he instilled. "You're a pawn in my game, Detective," the Zodiac said, "a puppet dancing on my strings." The call ended abruptly, leaving Anderson with a sense of dread and frustration. The trace had been unsuccessful. The Zodiac had vanished once again. The game of cat and mouse continued, with Anderson relentlessly pursuing the killer, driven by a burning desire for justice. He followed every lead, every whisper, every hunch, but the Zodiac remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. The city was on edge, the fear palpable. The Zodiac's shadow loomed over every street corner, every dark alley. People were afraid to go out at night, afraid to be alone. Anderson, consumed by the case, became a recluse, isolating himself from his friends and family. He was haunted by the victims' faces, by the Zodiac's taunting voice. He felt like he was losing himself in the darkness, consumed by the very evil he was trying to fight. One day, a package arrived at the police station, addressed to Anderson. It was a small, nondescript box, wrapped in plain brown paper. Anderson's heart pounded as he opened it. Inside, he found a single item, a blood-stained knife. Attached to the knife was a note, written in the Zodiac's distinctive handwriting. It read, "This is for you, Detective, a souvenir of our little game." Anderson stared at the knife, his mind reeling. The Zodiac was taunting him, mocking him, reminding him of his failure to catch him. He felt a surge of anger, a primal rage that consumed him. He was going to catch this killer, no matter the cost. He would bring him to justice, even if it was the last thing he did. The hunt was on. The knife became a constant companion, a grim reminder of the killer's audacity and Anderson's own vulnerability. He carried it everywhere, a symbol of his determination, a promise to the victims, and a threat to their tormentor. The city was a tinderbox, the tension palpable. Every shadow seemed to hold the Zodiac, every stranger a potential suspect. Anderson, driven by a relentless obsession, pushed himself to the limit, sacrificing his health and well-being in his pursuit of justice. He revisited the crime scenes, meticulously analyzing every detail, searching for any overlooked clue. He interviewed witnesses, poring over their statements, looking for inconsistencies, for any hint of deception. He delved into the Zodiac's letters, deciphering the ciphers, trying to understand the killer's twisted mind. He worked tirelessly, day and night, fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire for vengeance. He became a shadow of his former self, haunted by nightmares, consumed by the case. One night, While reviewing the case files, Anderson noticed a pattern in the Zodiac's attacks. The dates of the murders corresponded with specific astrological events, aligning with the killer's self-proclaimed moniker. He consulted with an astrologer, hoping to gain insight into the killer's motives and predict his next move. The astrologer, a woman named Sarah, was intrigued by the case and offered her assistance. She studied the Zodiac's letters and ciphers, analyzing the astrological symbols and their potential meaning. She believed the killer was driven by a desire for power and recognition, seeking to align his actions with the celestial movements. Together, Anderson and Sarah worked tirelessly, deciphering the Zodiac's cryptic messages, trying to anticipate his next move. They felt like they were in a race against time, trying to prevent another tragedy. One evening, Sarah noticed a pattern in the Zodiac ciphers, a recurring sequence of symbols that corresponded to a specific date and location. She believed the Zodiac was planning his next attack, and it was imminent. Anderson, his heart pounding, immediately alerted the police, dispatching officers to the predicted location. He raced to the scene, his mind filled with a mixture of hope and dread. As he arrived, he saw a figure lurking in the shadows, a man matching the description of the Zodiac. The man was holding a gun, his face obscured by a mask. Anderson, his weapon drawn, approached the figure, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Zodiac," he said, "it's over." The figure turned, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. The Zodiac lunged. A shot rang out, echoing through the night. Anderson felt a searing pain in his shoulder, but he returned fire, his shots aimed true. The figure stumbled, dropping the gun, and disappeared into the darkness. Backup arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The area was cordoned off, a massive manhunt launched. Anderson, his shoulder throbbing, insisted on joining the search. He pushed through the pain, adrenaline fueling his every move. They found the Zodiac, cornered like a rat in a dilapidated warehouse. He was wounded, desperate, but still dangerous. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with anticipation. Anderson, his vision blurred by blood loss, negotiated with the killer, trying to de-escalate the situation to avoid further bloodshed. But the Zodiac was beyond reason, his mind consumed by madness. He railed against the world, against the police, against Anderson himself. He vowed to continue his reign of terror, to claim more victims. Anderson, realizing the futility of negotiation, made a split-second decision. He charged, tackling the Zodiac to the ground. A struggle ensued, a desperate fight for survival. Anderson, despite his injuries, managed to overpower the killer, wrestling the gun away. The Zodiac was arrested, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, the fear that had gripped them for so long finally lifting. Anderson, hailed as a hero, was lauded for his bravery and dedication. But the scars of the case remained, a constant reminder of the darkness he had faced. He never fully recovered from his injuries, both physical and psychological. The Zodiac's taunting voice echoed in his nightmares. The victims' faces haunted his waking hours. The case, though closed, left a lingering sense of unease. The Zodiac's true identity remained a mystery, his motives shrouded in darkness. The ciphers remained unsolved, the letters a chilling testament to his twisted mind. Anderson retired from the police force, seeking solace in a quiet life away from the city. But the ghost of the Zodiac continued to haunt him, a constant reminder of the evil that lurks in the shadows, waiting to emerge. The Zodiac may have been caught, but his legend lived on, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can consume even the most rational minds. And Anderson, forever scarred by his encounter with the killer, carried the weight of that darkness with him, a burden he would bear for the rest of his days. The Unsolved Mystery of Bonnie Lee Bakley. The night was cool and crisp in Los Angeles, the kind that made the city lights shimmer with an almost eerie glow. Robert Blake, a veteran actor known for his tough guy roles, and his wife, Bonnie Lee Backley, were leaving Vitello's, an Italian restaurant in Studio City. They had just finished a quiet dinner, a rare moment of normalcy in their tumultuous relationship. Bonnie, a woman shrouded in mystery and controversy, had a past filled with scams and a relentless pursuit of fame and fortune. Her marriage to Blake, a man decades her senior, was a whirlwind romance that raised eyebrows in Hollywood circles. As they reached their car, Blake realized he had left his revolver inside the restaurant. He told Bonnie to wait and headed back inside. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an eternity. When Blake returned, a chilling sight met his eyes. Bonnie was slumped over in the passenger seat, blood trickling from a gunshot wound to her head. Panic surged through him. He ran for help, shouting for someone, anyone, to call 911. The quiet street was suddenly awash in flashing lights and the piercing wail of sirens. But it was too late. Bonnie Lee Backley was dead. The investigation that followed was a media frenzy. Blake, with his hard-boiled persona and troubled past, became the prime suspect. Whispers of their volatile relationship and Bonnie's checkered history painted a grim picture. A year later, he was arrested and charged with her murder. The trial was a spectacle, a Hollywood drama unfolding in a real-life courtroom. The prosecution portrayed Blake as a jealous husband who wanted to be rid of his troublesome wife. The defense argued that Blake was innocent, a victim of circumstance and Bonnie's shady past. After a tense deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Not guilty. Blake was a free man, but the shadow of suspicion lingered. The story didn't end there. Bonnie's children, convinced of Blake's guilt, filed a wrongful death lawsuit. This time, the verdict went against him. He was found liable for her death and ordered to pay a staggering $30 million in damages. The case faded from the headlines, but the mystery remained. Who killed Bonnie Lee Backley? Was it Robert Blake, driven to desperation? Or was it someone from her past, seeking revenge or silencing a troublesome witness? Even today, years later, the truth remains elusive. Bonnie's death, like her life, is shrouded in enigma, a chilling reminder of the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of Hollywood glamour. The air hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes, a peculiar blend that only Los Angeles at night could conjure. A lone street lamp cast an anemic glow on the cracked asphalt outside Vitello's, the Italian restaurant where Robert Blake and Bonnie Lee Backley had just finished their meal. The quiet hum of the city, a distant symphony of sirens and car horns, seemed to amplify the silence that enveloped them as they walked towards their car. Blake, his face etched with the lines of a life lived hard, felt a familiar unease settle over him. It wasn't the city. He was a creature of its shadows, a product of its gritty underbelly. It was Bonnie, his wife of less than a year, who stirred this disquiet within him. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a woman cloaked in secrets and contradictions. Bonnie Lee Backley, the woman who had captured his attention with a tenacity that bordered on obsession, was a study in contrasts. She was a small-town girl from New Jersey with dreams as big as Hollywood itself. Her past was a tapestry woven with ambition, deceit, and a relentless pursuit of fame and fortune. She built a career on exploiting lonely hearts, running mail-order schemes that promised companionship and romance, delivering only heartbreak and empty wallets. Blake, a man who knew the darkness of human nature firsthand, was both intrigued and repulsed by her. He saw in her a reflection of his own demons, a kindred spirit who understood the hunger for recognition and the desperation that lurked beneath the surface. Their relationship was a volatile cocktail of passion and mistrust, fueled by their shared flaws and a mutual fascination with the abyss. As they reached their car, a vintage Cadillac parked beneath the flickering neon sign of a nearby motel, Blake felt a sudden pang of regret. He had left his revolver inside the restaurant, a force of habit from his days playing tough guys on screen. "Wait here," he muttered to Bonnie, his voice gruff with annoyance. "I forgot something." He turned and walked back towards the restaurant, the dim light of the entrance beckoning him like a moth to a flame. As he pushed open the door, the familiar aroma of garlic and marinara sauce washed over him, momentarily erasing the tension that had gripped him outside. He retrieved his gun from the booth where they had been sitting and slipped it into his pocket, the cool metal a comforting weight against his hip. Stepping back out into the night, a wave of dread washed over him. The Cadillac was shrouded in an unnatural silence, the only sound the gentle hum of the engine. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the car, he saw Bonnie slumped over in the passenger seat, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. A scream tore from his throat, a primal sound that echoed through the empty street. He flung open the car door, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Her skin was cold, her eyes staring blankly into the darkness. A crimson stain bloomed on her blouse, marking the spot where a bullet had pierced her skull. Panic seized him. He stumbled out of the car, his mind reeling. He had to get help, call the police, but his legs felt like lead. He ran towards the restaurant, his cries for help growing louder with each desperate step. The arrival of the police was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Blake, his clothes stained with Bonnie's blood, could only watch helplessly as they cordoned off the area, transforming the quiet street into a crime scene. He was ushered into a patrol car, the leather seat cold against his skin, the questions of the officers a distant drone in his ears. The news of Bonnie's death spread like wildfire, igniting a media frenzy that consumed the city. Blake, the once beloved actor, became the prime suspect, his face plastered across newspapers and television screens, his name synonymous with murder. The whispers started, fueled by Bonnie's checkered past and the rumors of their tumultuous relationship. He was a man trapped in a nightmare, his life dissected and scrutinized under the harsh glare of public opinion. The police, eager to close the case, focused their investigation on him, their questions laced with suspicion and accusation. He maintained his innocence, but his protests were met with skepticism. The trial was a public spectacle, a macabre circus where his life was laid bare for all to see. The prosecution painted him as a jealous husband, driven to murder by his wife's manipulative ways and her insatiable desire for his money. They presented evidence of their arguments, their volatile relationship, and his past struggles with anger and violence. The defense fought back, portraying Blake as a victim of circumstance, a man caught in the web of Bonnie's deceitful life. They highlighted her past scams, her numerous aliases, and the enemies she had made along the way. They suggested that her murder was the result of her own shady dealings, a consequence of her relentless pursuit of wealth and fame. The courtroom was a cauldron of emotions, a battleground where truth and lies wrestled for dominance. Blake, his face etched with a weariness that belied his tough guy persona, sat at the defendant's table, his eyes darting between the jury, the witnesses, and his lawyer. He was a man caught in a web of his own making, his life dissected and judged under the unforgiving scrutiny of the law. The prosecution, led by the ambitious Deputy District Attorney Shelley Samuels, presented a meticulously crafted case. They painted Blake as a man consumed by jealousy and rage, driven to murder by Bonnie's manipulative ways and her insatiable desire for his money. They called witnesses who testified to their volatile arguments, his past struggles with anger, and his growing resentment of Bonnie's demands. A parade of experts took the stand, analyzing blood spatter patterns, gunshot residue, and the trajectory of the fatal bullet. They presented evidence suggesting that Blake had ample opportunity to commit the crime, that his behavior after the shooting was indicative of guilt, and that his claims of innocence were a carefully constructed facade. The defense, led by the seasoned attorney Harlan Braun, countered with a narrative of their own. They portrayed Blake as a victim of circumstance, a man ensnared in the tangled web of Bonnie's deceitful life. They highlighted her past scams, her numerous aliases, and the long list of people she had wronged. They suggested that her murder was a consequence of her own shady dealings, a karmic retribution for her years of exploitation and deceit. They called witnesses who testified to Bonnie's manipulative nature, her relentless pursuit of wealth and fame, and her willingness to use anyone and everyone to achieve her goals. They presented evidence suggesting that she had made enemies along the way, people who might have had a motive to silence her permanently. The trial dragged on for months, a relentless tug-of-war between two competing narratives. The jury, a group of ordinary citizens thrust into the center of a Hollywood drama, listened intently, their faces etched with concentration as they weighed the evidence and the arguments. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy continued unabated. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their cameras capturing every arrival and departure, their microphones thrust in the faces of lawyers, witnesses, and anyone remotely connected to the case. The public was captivated, their fascination with the dark side of Hollywood fueling the insatiable demand for every salacious detail. Blake, meanwhile, remained a prisoner of his own notoriety. He was confined to his home, his movements monitored by an electronic ankle bracelet, his life reduced to a monotonous routine of legal consultations, court appearances, and sleepless nights. The shadow of suspicion clung to him, a constant reminder of the life he had lost and the uncertain future that lay ahead. As the trial neared its end, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The closing arguments were delivered with passionate intensity, each side pleading their case with a mix of logic, emotion, and theatrics. The jury, their faces etched with the weight of their responsibility, retired to deliberate, their verdict holding the key to Blake's fate. Days turned into weeks, the suspense growing with each passing hour. The world watched and waited, eager for a resolution to the saga that had captivated their attention. Finally, the jury emerged, their faces betraying nothing of their decision. The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the rustling of papers and the hushed whispers of anticipation. The verdict was read, not guilty. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a wave of murmurs and exclamations. Blake, his face etched with a mixture of relief and disbelief, slumped back in his chair, his body trembling with the release of months of pent-up tension. He was a free man, but the shadow of suspicion would forever linger. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for phones, eager to be the first to break the news. Spectators buzzed with excitement, debating the verdict and speculating on the future. Blake, surrounded by his legal team, remained stoic, his face a mask of guarded relief. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Outside the courthouse, a different scene unfolded. Bonnie's children, their faces etched with anger and disbelief, denounced the verdict, vowing to seek justice for their mother. They held a press conference, their voices trembling with emotion as they accused Blake of murder and the jury of failing to see the truth. The media, sensing a new chapter in the saga, turned their attention to the civil trial that loomed on the horizon. The wrongful death lawsuit filed by Bonnie's children promised to be another public spectacle, a chance to re-examine the evidence and expose the truth that the criminal trial had failed to uncover. Blake, despite his acquittal, remained a pariah in Hollywood. The shadow of suspicion clung to him, making him an outcast in the industry that had once embraced him. He retreated from public life, his once promising career reduced to a footnote in the annals of Hollywood history. The civil trial, when it finally arrived, was a stark contrast to the criminal proceedings. The focus shifted from proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to establishing liability based on a preponderance of the evidence. The jury, a new set of faces with no preconceived notions, listened intently as the lawyers presented their cases. The evidence, much of it familiar from the criminal trial, was re-examined and reinterpreted. Witnesses were recalled, their testimonies scrutinized for inconsistencies and hidden meanings. Experts debated the finer points of forensic analysis, their opinions clashing in a battle of scientific interpretations. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with emotion. Bonnie's children, their grief and anger palpable, sat in the front row, their eyes fixed on Blake, their silent accusations hanging heavy in the air. Blake, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had endured too much, sat hunched in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor, his mind a whirlwind of memories and regrets. The jury, after weeks of deliberation, reached a verdict. This time, the outcome was different. Blake was found liable for Bonnie's death, held responsible for the actions that had led to her tragic demise. He was ordered to pay a staggering sum in damages, a financial burden that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The verdict brought a sense of closure to Bonnie's family, a measure of justice for the woman whose life had been cut short. But for Blake, it was a final blow, a confirmation of the suspicion that had followed him for years. He had been acquitted in the eyes of the law, but in the court of public opinion, he remained a convicted man. The story of Robert Blake and Bonnie Lee Bakley is a tragic tale of ambition, deceit, and the dark side of fame. It is a reminder that even in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, darkness can lurk beneath the surface, and secrets can have deadly consequences. The mystery of Bonnie's death may never be fully solved, but her story continues to fascinate and haunt, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the past. The Vanished and Turned, the Chandra Levy Mystery. Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2001 was a city bustling with life, a place where ambition and power intertwined. Amidst the monuments and the political machinations, a young woman named Chandra and Levy was chasing her dreams. A bright and ambitious graduate student, she had landed an internship at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, eager to make her mark on the world. Chandra, with her infectious smile and vibrant personality, quickly became a popular figure in her office. She was known for her dedication, her quick wit, and her unwavering optimism. But beneath her cheerful exterior lay a secret, a forbidden romance with a powerful man, a man whose influence could make or break her career. Congressman Gary Condit, a charismatic figure with a reputation for his political prowess, was a married man with a secret life. His affair with Chandra was a dangerous liaison, a tangled web of passion and deceit that threatened to unravel both their lives. On April 30th, 2001, Chandra vanished without a trace. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the city, sparking a massive investigation that would expose the dark underbelly of Washington's political elite. The police searched Chandra's apartment, finding no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Her belongings were neatly arranged, her suitcase packed as if for a trip. Her computer revealed a history of internet searches, including maps of Rock Creek Park, a sprawling urban oasis where she often went jogging. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted to Congressman Condit. Rumors of their affair swirled through the media, casting a shadow of suspicion over the powerful politician. He denied any involvement in Chandra's disappearance, but his evasive answers and contradictory statements only fueled the public's doubts. The Levy family, desperate for answers, pleaded for Condit to cooperate, believing he held the key to their daughter's whereabouts. They organized vigils and press conferences, their faces etched with grief and frustration, their voices echoing with a mixture of hope and despair. Months turned into a year, and the mystery of Chandra's disappearance deepened. Search parties combed Rock Creek Park, their efforts hampered by the dense foliage and the vastness of the terrain. Psychics offered their insights, while amateur sleuths pored over every detail of the case, hoping to uncover a clue that had been overlooked. Then, on May 22, 2002, a gruesome discovery shattered the silence. A man walking his dog stumbled upon skeletal remains in a secluded area of Rock Creek Park. The remains were identified as Chandra's, her death ruled a homicide. But the cause of death remained a mystery, and the killer remained elusive. The discovery of Chandra's body reignited the investigation, but the passage of time had muddied the waters. Evidence had deteriorated, memories had faded, and the trail had grown cold. Condit, though never charged in connection with Chandra's death, remained a person of interest, his reputation tarnished, his career in ruins. The case of Chandra Levy became a national obsession, a tragic tale of ambition, betrayal, and the dark secrets that lurk beneath the surface of power. It was a reminder that even in the heart of the nation's capital, danger can lurk in the shadows, and the pursuit of dreams can lead to a nightmare. The discovery of Chandra's remains in Rock Creek Park cast a pall over the city. The vibrant young woman, full of promise and ambition, had been reduced to a collection of bones, a tragic victim of an unknown assailant. The idyllic park, once a sanctuary for joggers and nature lovers, was now a crime scene, its serene beauty tainted by the specter of death. The police, under intense pressure to solve the high-profile case, launched a renewed investigation. Detectives retraced Chandra's steps, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined every piece of evidence. They focused on Condit, scrutinizing his alibi, his phone records, and his every move in the days leading up to Chandra's disappearance. But Condit remained elusive, his answers carefully crafted, his demeanor guarded. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had no knowledge of Chandra's whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding her death. The public, however, remained skeptical, their suspicions fueled by the media's relentless coverage of the congressman's alleged indiscretions. The investigation expanded, exploring other potential suspects. There was the mysterious Sven, a man Chandra had met online, whose identity remained shrouded in anonymity. There were the homeless individuals who frequented the park, some with criminal records, others with troubled pasts. And there were the countless strangers who could have crossed paths with Chandra on that fateful day, their motives unknown, their identities lost in the vastness of the city. The park itself became a focal point of the investigation. Forensic experts meticulously examined the area where Chandra's remains were found, searching for clues that might lead to her killer. They analyzed soil samples, insect activity, and the condition of the remains, hoping to piece together a timeline of events. The media, meanwhile, continued to feed the public's insatiable appetite for details. Every development in the case was dissected and analyzed, every theory debated and scrutinized. The Levy family, thrust into the harsh glare of the spotlight, endured a relentless barrage of questions, their grief compounded by the constant intrusion into their private lives. As months turned into years, the investigation stalled. Leads dried up, witnesses recanted their statements, and the trail grew cold. The case of Chandra Levy, once a national obsession, faded from the headlines, replaced by new tragedies and fresh scandals. But for those closest to Chandra, the pain remained. Her family, haunted by unanswered questions, clung to the hope that one day, her killer would be brought to justice. They kept her memory alive, their voices a constant reminder of the vibrant young woman whose life was tragically cut short. The mystery of Chandra Levy's death continues to cast a long shadow. It is a story of unfulfilled dreams, political intrigue, and the fragility of life. It is a reminder that even in the most powerful city in the world, darkness can lurk in the shadows, and the pursuit of ambition can lead to a tragic end. The silence surrounding Chandra Levy's case was deafening. Years passed, seasons changed, and the city moved on, but the shadow of her unsolved murder lingered. The once vibrant investigation had dwindled to a flicker, a cold case file gathering dust in a forgotten corner of the police department. But in the quiet suburbs of Virginia, a determined detective refused to let the flame die out. Detective Ben Harris, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for tenacity and a knack for uncovering the truth, had been haunted by Chandra's case since the beginning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had been missed, a crucial piece of the puzzle overlooked in the initial frenzy. Driven by a sense of justice and a deep empathy for the Levy family, Harris decided to revisit the case. He pored over the old files, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined the evidence with a fresh perspective. He sought out new technologies, hoping that advances in forensic science might reveal clues that had been invisible before. Harris's investigation led him down a labyrinth of dead ends and false leads. He chased shadows and rumors, encountering a cast of characters ranging from opportunistic informants to shady figures lurking in the city's underbelly. He faced resistance from those who wanted the case to remain closed, those who feared the secrets it might unearth. But Harris persisted, driven by an unwavering belief that the truth could be found. He revisited Rock Creek Park, the site of Chandra's tragic end, seeking answers in the whispering trees and the murmuring stream. He studied the maps Chandra had viewed online, searching for a pattern, a hidden message that might reveal her final destination. His investigation led him to a secluded corner of the park, an area overlooked in the initial search. There, beneath a tangle of vines and fallen leaves, he discovered a small, tarnished locket. Inside, a faded photograph revealed a young Chandra, her smile radiant, her eyes full of life. The locket was a breakthrough, a tangible link to Chandra's past. Harris traced its origins, uncovering a forgotten connection to a man Chandra had briefly dated before her disappearance. The man, a troubled artist with a history of violence, had vanished shortly after Chandra's death. Harris tracked the artist to a remote cabin in the mountains, a place where shadows lingered and secrets whispered on the wind. A tense confrontation ensued, a clash between a determined detective and a man haunted by his past. The truth, buried for years, finally emerged, a dark tale of obsession, jealousy, and a tragic misunderstanding. The arrest of the artist brought a sense of closure to Chandra's family, a long-awaited answer to their years of agonizing questions. But it also served as a stark reminder of the enduring power of the past, the way that secrets can fester and darkness can linger even in the most unexpected places. Detective Harris, his mission fulfilled, returned to the quiet suburbs, carrying the weight of a solved case and the satisfaction of justice served. The city, once again, moved on, but the memory of Chandra Levy remained, a poignant reminder of a life cut short and the enduring pursuit of truth. The Devil's Number. The air in Sofia was thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and cheap cigarettes. Rain slicked the cobblestones, reflecting the neon glow of the Cyrillic signs. Inside a dimly lit cafe, a man huddled in a booth, his face obscured by the shadow of a fedora. He nervously glanced at his burner phone, the digits 0888, 888, 888 glowing ominously on the screen. This was it, the number, the one they said was cursed. His name was Anton, and he was a journalist investigating the strange deaths surrounding this infamous phone number. It had belonged to Vladimir Grashnov, the former CEO of Mobidol, who died suddenly of a suspected poisoning. Then it was passed on to Konstantin Dimitrov, a notorious drug lord, gunned down in broad daylight in Amsterdam. The last owner, Konstantin Dishlev, another underworld figure, met his end in a hail of bullets outside a Sofia restaurant. 3 deaths in 10 years, all connected to this seemingly ordinary phone number. Mobidol, shaken by the macabre coincidence, had suspended the number, refusing to reassign it. But Anton, driven by morbid curiosity and the promise of a career-defining scoop, had used his contacts to reactivate it. He wanted to understand the curse, to feel its touch, to experience the fear that had consumed its previous owners. The first few days were uneventful. Anton received a few wrong numbers, a couple of telemarketing calls, nothing out of the ordinary. He started to think that the curse was just a silly superstition, a morbid urban legend. But then the nightmares began. Vivid, terrifying dreams plagued his sleep. He saw Grashnov choking on his own blood, Dimitrov's lifeless eyes staring into the distance, Dishlev's body riddled with bullet holes. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around his legs, his heart pounding in his chest. Then came the phone calls. At first, they were just whispers, faint and indistinct, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But they grew louder, more insistent, until they were a cacophony of voices, screaming his name, pleading for help, cursing him for disturbing their rest. He tried to ignore them, to convince himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But the calls became more frequent, more menacing. They would come at all hours of the day and night, interrupting his meals, his work, his sleep. He started to see shadows lurking in the corners of his eyes, felt a cold presence following him wherever he went. One night, the phone rang at 3 a.m. He let it go to voicemail, but the ringing persisted, relentless and chilling. Finally, he picked up the receiver, his hand trembling. "Hello?" he croaked, his voice hoarse. Silence. Then, a voice, deep and guttural, whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't have answered." The phone went dead. Anton slammed the receiver down, his heart pounding in his chest. He jumped at the slightest sound, his senses on high alert. He felt a cold dread creep over him, a sense of impending doom. The next day, he decided to visit the graves of the 3 men who had owned the number before him. He needed to understand, to find some answers. He started with Grashnov, whose grave was in a quiet corner of Sofia's central cemetery. As he stood there, staring at the tombstone, a cold wind swept through the graveyard, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He moved on to Dimitrov's grave, located in a more opulent section of the cemetery. The tombstone was a grand affair, a testament to the drug lord's wealth and power. But even in death, Dimitrov couldn't escape the shadow of the curse. Anton felt a sense of unease, a feeling that he was being watched. Finally, he arrived at Dishlev's grave. It was the most recent of the 3, the flowers still fresh. As he stood there, a sense of dread washed over him. He felt a presence, cold and malevolent, lurking nearby. He turned around, but there was no one there. He hurried away from the cemetery, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to get rid of the number, to break the curse. He rushed back to his apartment, grabbed the burner phone, and smashed it to pieces. He felt a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But it was too late. The curse had already taken hold. That night, the nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. He saw the 3 men, their faces contorted in agony, reaching out to him from the darkness. He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, his body shaking uncontrollably. He tried to go back to sleep, but the fear was too overwhelming. He paced the floor, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. He felt a presence in the room, a cold, suffocating presence. He turned on the lights, but there was nothing there. He went to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the outside world, to reassure himself that he wasn't alone. But as he looked out, he saw a figure standing in the street below, shrouded in shadow. The figure looked up, and Anton met its gaze. It was the face of death, cold and lifeless, staring back at him. Anton stumbled back from the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew then that the curse was real, and that it was coming for him. He tried to run, to escape, but it was too late. The door creaked open, and the figure stepped into the room. Anton screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. He felt a cold hand grip his throat, squeezing the life out of him. He struggled, but it was no use. The figure leaned in close, its breath cold against his ear. "You shouldn't have answered," it whispered. Anton's vision blurred. His body went limp. The last thing he saw was the face of death, grinning triumphantly. The next morning, Anton's body was found in his apartment, his face contorted in terror. The cause of death was ruled a heart attack, but the police couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. The story of the cursed phone number quickly spread throughout Sofia, and the number became known as the Devil's Number. Mobitel never reassigned the number, and it remains suspended to this day. Some say that the curse is still active, waiting for its next victim. Others believe that it's just a silly superstition, a morbid urban legend. But one thing is certain, the story of the Devil's Number will continue to haunt the streets of Sofia for years to come. The ghost of Richard Parker. The year was 1884. The Mignonette, a sturdy but unremarkable yacht, set sail from Southampton, England, bound for Australia. On board were Captain Tom Dudley, Edwin Stevens, Edmund Brooks, and a young cabin boy named Richard Parker. None of them could have known their journey would become a chilling echo of a fictional horror, a tale penned decades earlier by the macabre master Edgar Allan Poe. In Poe's 1838 novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, a gruesome scene unfolds where starving sailors, adrift after a shipwreck, resort to cannibalism to survive. The unfortunate victim drawn by lot? Richard Parker, a name that would haunt the real-life tragedy soon to befall the Mignonette. Weeks into their voyage, disaster struck. A monstrous wave, surging from a tempestuous storm, crashed upon the Mignonette, splintering its hull and sending the vessel to a watery grave. The four men escaped with their lives, clinging to a meager lifeboat, their hopes as fragile as the tiny craft beneath them. Days bled into weeks. The relentless sun beat down, turning their skin to parchment. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, a constant, agonizing companion. Thirst parched their throats, their lips cracked and bleeding. Provisions dwindled, then vanished. The vast, indifferent ocean stretched around them, offering no solace, no escape. Richard Parker, the youngest of the group, succumbed first. Weakened by hunger and thirst, he drank seawater in desperation, a fatal mistake. Delirium set in, his moans a constant reminder of their impending doom. Captain Dudley, a man hardened by years at sea, made the grim proposal. They had to eat, to survive, to live. The lot was drawn. Richard Parker, already on the brink of death, was their sacrifice. The act was brutal, desperate, a stain on their souls, but it kept them alive. For another agonizing week, they drifted, sustained by the flesh of the boy who had shared their fate. Then, a sail, rescue, salvation. Back on land, the tale of their survival unfolded, the horrifying truth of their ordeal laid bare. The world recoiled in horror. Cannibalism, a taboo act, a desperate measure, became their legacy. Dudley and Stevens were arrested, tried, and convicted of murder. The specter of Richard Parker hung heavy in the courtroom, his name forever linked to their crime. But the story doesn't end there. For years after the trial, the survivors were haunted by the ghost of Richard Parker. Dudley, a devout man, claimed to see the boy's spectral form in the shadows, his eyes accusing, his voice a whisper on the wind. Stevens, plagued by nightmares, would wake screaming, the taste of salt and blood lingering in his mouth. Brooks, the quietest of the three, retreated into himself, his guilt a heavy burden. The ghost of Richard Parker wasn't confined to their dreams. Strange occurrences plagued the men. Objects moved inexplicably. Whispers echoed in empty rooms. The scent of seawater, thick and cloying, would suddenly fill the air, a chilling reminder of their ordeal. One stormy night, Dudley, unable to bear the torment any longer, ventured to the docks. The wind howled like a banshee, the waves crashing against the pilings. As he stared out at the turbulent sea, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Richard Parker, his clothes ragged, his skin pale and translucent. "Why?" the spectral boy whispered, his voice a mournful wail carried on the wind. "Why did you eat me?" Dudley fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me, Richard," he begged. "We were desperate. We had no choice." The ghost drifted closer, its icy touch sending shivers down Dudley's spine. "There is always a choice," it whispered, "but you chose to take my life." Dudley cried out, his voice lost in the storm. The ghost vanished, leaving him alone in the darkness, the weight of his sin crushing him. He stumbled home, a broken man, forever haunted by the ghost of Richard Parker. Stevens, too, was tormented by the spectral boy. In his dreams, he would relive the gruesome scene on the lifeboat, the taste of Richard Parker's flesh raw and vivid in his memory. He would wake in a cold sweat, the sheets twisted around him, the feeling of the boy's ghostly hand on his throat suffocating him. One day, While walking through a crowded market, Stevens heard a voice calling his name. He turned, but saw no one. The voice came again, a whisper, chillingly familiar. "You will never escape me," it said. Stevens panicked, pushing his way through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran until he collapsed, gasping for breath, the ghostly voice still echoing in his ears. From that day on, he became a recluse, afraid to venture out, convinced that Richard Parker's ghost was always watching, waiting. Brooks, the youngest of the survivors, suffered in silence. He rarely spoke of the ordeal, but the guilt gnawed at him. He would often wander the streets at night, drawn to the docks, the smell of the sea a constant reminder of his sin. One night, as he stood at the edge of the pier, staring out at the moonlit water, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned and saw Richard Parker standing beside him, his eyes filled with sadness and reproach. "You did nothing to stop them," the ghost said softly. "You let them take my life." Brooks broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was weak," he cried. "I was afraid." The ghost placed a spectral hand on his cheek, its touch surprisingly warm. "It's not too late," it whispered. "Tell the world what they did. Let my story be known." Brooks nodded, his tears drying. He would honor Richard Parker's memory. He would tell the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, Brooks went to the authorities, confessing his role in the tragedy. His testimony, along with the lingering guilt of Dudley and Stevens, led to a retrial. This time, all three men were convicted of murder and sentenced to death. As they awaited their execution, the ghost of Richard Parker appeared to them one last time. He stood before them, not as a vengeful spirit, but as a sad, lost boy. He forgave them, he said, and he hoped they would find peace. The men were hanged, their lives forever marked by the tragedy of the Mignonette. But the story of Richard Parker lived on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can consume even the most desperate of men. And somewhere, in the depths of the ocean, the ghost of the cabin boy finally found rest, his story told, his memory honored. The ghost ship SS Aurang Medan. The year was 1948. A sweltering heat hung over the Malacca Strait, the humid air thick with the smell of salt and brine. The sun beat down mercilessly on the calm waters, where a lone vessel, the SS Aurang Medan, sailed towards its doom. Unbeknownst to the world, a chilling drama was unfolding aboard the Dutch freighter. In the cramped radio room, a lone figure hunched over the wireless set, his brow slick with sweat. His fingers flew across the keys, tapping out a desperate message into the ether. All officers, including Captain Dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. The message, garbled and frantic, crackled across the airwaves, reaching the ears of startled operators on nearby vessels. A chilling silence followed, broken only by the static hiss of the radio. Then, a final, chilling transmission, sent in Morse code, "I die." The message sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The Silver Star, an American merchant ship sailing nearby, immediately changed course and steamed towards the Aurang Medan's last known position. Captain Carstens, a seasoned sailor with nerves of steel, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had heard tales of ghost ships and cursed waters, but he had always dismissed them as sailors' lore. Now, as he steered his vessel towards the stricken ship, he couldn't shake off a sense of foreboding. As the Silver Star approached the Aurang Medan, an eerie silence greeted them. The freighter drifted aimlessly, its once pristine white hull now stained with rust and grime. There was no sign of life on deck, no movement, no sound. Captain Carstens ordered a boarding party, handpicking a group of his most trusted men. Armed with revolvers and flashlights, they cautiously made their way across the narrow gangplank and onto the deserted deck of the Aurang Medan. An oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the creaking of the ship and the lapping of waves against the hull. The boarding party spread out, their footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness. As they ventured deeper into the ship, a sense of dread crept over them. The air grew colder, and a faint, metallic scent permeated the atmosphere. In the chart room, they found the captain and his officers sprawled on the floor, their faces contorted in a mask of terror. Their eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, their hands clenched into claws. The same horrifying scene awaited them on the bridge, where the helmsman and other crew members lay dead, their bodies frozen in grotesque postures. The sight that greeted them in the engine room was even more disturbing. The engineers lay slumped over their stations, their faces twisted in agony. The furnace blazed unattended, its heat adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Fear gripped the boarding party. They had seen death before, but never like this. These men hadn't just died. They had died in fear, their last moments consumed by unimaginable terror. As they continued their grim exploration, they found more bodies scattered throughout the ship. In the mess hall, plates lay half-eaten, cups overturned, as if the crew had been interrupted in the middle of a meal. In the cabins, personal belongings lay strewn about, suggesting a hasty abandonment. But there was no sign of a struggle, no indication of what had caused this mass fatality. The men of the Silver Star were baffled. What could have caused such a horrific scene? Was it a disease, a pirate attack, or something more sinister? As they searched for answers, a strange chill settled over the ship. The temperature dropped, and a sense of unease permeated the air. Captain Carstens, sensing the growing fear among his men, ordered them to return to the Silver Star. They needed to get off this cursed vessel before whatever had killed the crew of the Aurang Medan claimed them as well. As they prepared to leave, a thin wisp of smoke curled up from the cargo hold. The smell of burning oil filled the air, quickly followed by a loud hissing sound. The men exchanged panicked glances. Something was amiss. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the ship, throwing the boarding party off their feet. Flames erupted from the cargo hold, engulfing the ship in a fiery inferno. Captain Carstens, realizing the danger, ordered his men to abandon ship. They scrambled back to the Silver Star, casting horrified glances back at the burning vessel. The Aurang Medan, consumed by flames, began to sink beneath the waves, taking its secrets with it to the bottom of the sea. Back on the Silver Star, Captain Carstens watched the inferno with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He had witnessed many tragedies at sea, but nothing like this. The sheer terror etched on the faces of the dead, the unnatural chill that had permeated the Aurang Medan, the sudden explosion. It all pointed to something beyond human comprehension. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the maritime community. Theories abounded, ranging from pirate attacks and chemical leaks to supernatural forces and alien encounters. Some whispered of a cursed cargo, others of a malevolent entity that haunted the Malacca Strait. The official investigation concluded that the Aurang Medan had likely been carrying a dangerous cargo, possibly potassium cyanide or nitroglycerin, which had reacted with seawater, creating toxic fumes and ultimately leading to the explosion. However, this explanation failed to account for the terrifying expressions on the faces of the dead, the chilling messages sent before the ship's demise, and the eerie silence that had greeted the Silver Star's boarding party. The mystery of the Aurang Medan remained unsolved, fueling speculation and inspiring countless tales of horror. The ship became a legend, a ghost ship forever sailing the seas, a chilling reminder of the unknown terrors that lurk beneath the waves. 20 years later, the year was 1968. A young, ambitious journalist named Alex Harper, intrigued by the legend of the Aurang Medan, decided to investigate the case. He scoured old maritime records, interviewed retired sailors, and even tracked down some of the surviving crew members of the Silver Star. Alex was determined to uncover the truth behind the tragedy, even if it meant risking his own sanity. He was drawn to the story, not just by the mystery, but also by a strange sense of connection, as if the fate of the Aurang Medan held some personal significance for him. His investigation led him to a secluded island in the Indonesian archipelago, rumored to be the last port of call for the Aurang Medan. The island was shrouded in mystery, its inhabitants wary of outsiders. Alex, undeterred, managed to gain the trust of an old fisherman who claimed to have witnessed the Aurang Medan's final voyage. The old man, his face weathered by years of sun and sea, spoke in hushed tones of a strange mist that had enveloped the ship, of eerie lights that danced on the deck, and of unearthly screams that echoed across the water. He claimed that the Aurang Medan was not just a ship, but a vessel of evil, carrying a dark secret that should never have been disturbed. Alex, skeptical yet intrigued, decided to explore the wreckage of the Aurang Medan, which was said to lie in the depths off the island's coast. He hired a local diver and, equipped with diving gear and an underwater camera, ventured into the murky depths. As he descended into the cold, dark water, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The wreckage of the Aurang Medan loomed into view, a skeletal silhouette against the faint light filtering through the water. Schools of fish darted in and out of the broken hull, their scales glinting like silver coins. Alex swam towards the ship, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the water pressing down on him, the silence broken only by the sound of his own breathing. As he approached the deck, he noticed something strange. The bodies of the crew, still preserved after all these years, were not just lying on the deck. They were reaching out, their skeletal fingers grasping at the empty water, their faces frozen in a silent scream. A chill ran down Alex's spine. He had seen photographs of the dead crew, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer horror of seeing them in person. It was as if they were trapped in an eternal moment of terror, their souls forever bound to the ship. He swam towards the bridge, where he found the captain's skeletal remains still clutching the wheel, his empty eye sockets staring out into the abyss. Alex felt a presence, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to emanate from the ship. He had a sudden urge to flee, to escape the watery grave of the Aurang Medan. But his journalistic curiosity, his thirst for the truth, compelled him to stay. He had to know what had happened, what dark secret the ship held. He swam towards the radio room, hoping to find some clue, some answer to the mystery that had haunted him for so long. As he entered the cramped room, he saw it, a small, wooden box tucked away in a corner. He reached for it, his gloved hand brushing against the cold, damp wood. As he opened the box, a wave of icy air hit him, and a sense of dread washed over him. Inside the box, nestled amongst faded velvet lining, lay a strange artifact, a black, obsidian stone, carved with intricate symbols. As Alex touched the stone, a vision flashed before his eyes, a vision of the Aurang Medan, enveloped in a swirling mist, its crew writhing in agony, their faces contorted in terror. He saw the source of their fear, a creature of pure darkness, its eyes burning with malevolent energy. The creature reached out, its shadowy claws tearing at the souls of the crew, dragging them into the abyss. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Alex gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his ears. He stumbled back, dropping the obsidian stone, which clattered against the metal floor of the radio room. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead, his body trembling with fear. He had seen the truth, the horrifying truth behind the Aurang Medan's demise. He scrambled out of the radio room, his mind reeling. He had to get out of there, to escape the clutches of the ship and its dark secret. He swam towards the surface, his lungs burning, his legs kicking frantically. He broke through the surface, gasping for air, the sunlight blinding after the darkness of the depths. He clambered back onto the boat, his body shaking with cold and fear. He babbled incoherently to the diver, who looked at him with concern. Alex, unable to explain what he had seen, simply pointed towards the depths, his eyes wide with terror. The diver, sensing the urgency in Alex's voice, quickly started the engine and steered the boat away from the wreckage. As they sped away, Alex cast one last glance back at the Aurang Medan, its skeletal frame disappearing beneath the waves. He knew he had escaped with his life, but he also knew that the ship and its dark secret would forever haunt his dreams. Back on the island, Alex tried to make sense of what he had seen. He researched the obsidian stone, discovering that it was an ancient artifact, rumored to have the power to open portals to other dimensions. He realized that the Aurang Medan had not just been a ship, but a gateway, a conduit for something evil to enter our world. He also realized that his connection to the ship was more than just journalistic curiosity. The vision he had seen, the creature he had glimpsed, it had all felt strangely familiar, as if he had encountered it before, in another life, in another time. He delved deeper into his own family history, discovering a long-forgotten ancestor, a sailor who had disappeared at sea in the early 1900s. He had been a crew member on a ship that had sailed through the Malacca Strait, a ship that had encountered a strange mist and a black obsidian stone. Alex realized with a growing sense of dread that his ancestor had been the one who had brought the stone onto the ship, unwittingly unleashing the evil that had consumed the Aurang Medan. He was the heir to this dark legacy, the one who had to stop the creature from entering our world again. He knew what he had to do. He had to return to the Aurang Medan, to confront the creature and destroy the obsidian stone. He knew it was a dangerous mission, one that could cost him his life, but he was determined to fulfill his destiny, to break the curse that had haunted his family for generations. He gathered his equipment, his resolve strengthened by a newfound sense of purpose. He hired the diver again, and together they set sail for the wreckage of the Aurang Medan. As they approached the site, the sea grew choppy, the sky darkened with storm clouds. Alex felt a sense of foreboding, but he pressed on, his determination unwavering. He plunged back into the depths, the cold water enveloping him like a shroud. He swam towards the wreckage, his flashlight beam cutting through the murky darkness. He reached the deck, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the presence of the creature, its malevolent energy swirling around him. He made his way to the radio room, where he had left the obsidian stone. He found it lying on the floor, its black surface gleaming in the dim light. He picked it up, his hand trembling. He could feel its power, its dark energy pulsing through his veins. He swam back to the deck, the creature's presence growing stronger. He could hear its whispers in his mind, its promises of power and immortality. But Alex resisted, his will strengthened by the memory of the Aurang Medan's crew, their faces frozen in eternal terror. He raised the obsidian stone above his head, its dark energy swirling around him. He closed his eyes and focused all his will, all his energy, into a single thought: destroy the stone, break the curse. With a final surge of strength, he hurled the stone against the rusted hull of the ship. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, its dark energy dissipating into the water. The creature's presence vanished, the whispers in his mind silenced. The ship groaned, its structure weakening. Alex knew it was time to leave. He swam towards the surface, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. He had fulfilled his destiny, but he had also lost a part of himself, a part that had been connected to the Aurang Medan and its dark secret. As he broke through the surface, the storm clouds parted, the sunlight streaming down on him. He looked back at the wreckage, watching as the Aurang Medan finally succumbed to the depths, its secrets forever buried beneath the waves. The haunting daguerreotypes. The acrid smell of chemicals stung Rita Swift's nostrils as she meticulously developed the roll of film she'd found lying abandoned in the dusty corner of a flea market. It was 1997, and film photography was already becoming a relic of the past, replaced by the instant gratification of digital cameras. Yet, Rita, a photography enthusiast with a penchant for the vintage, clung to the old ways. There was a certain magic, a tangible connection to the past that digital couldn't replicate. The film, a standard 35mm roll, felt oddly heavy in her hands, the canister cold to the touch. A shiver ran down her spine, a premonition she quickly dismissed as the chill of the dimly lit darkroom. As the images slowly began to appear in the developing tray, a sense of unease crept over her. The first few photos were mundane, a blurry snapshot of a park bench, a slightly out-of-focus portrait of a young couple, a sun-drenched beach scene, typical vacation shots, probably from the late 60s or early 70s, judging by the clothing and hairstyles. Then came the anomaly. 3 photographs, starkly different from the rest, emerged from the chemical bath. They were grainy, almost ethereal, with an otherworldly quality that made the hairs on Rita's neck stand on end. The subjects were a group of Native Americans, their faces etched with a haunting solemnity. Their attire, intricate and adorned with feathers and beads, seemed to belong to a bygone era, the 1800s perhaps. But what truly sent a chill down Rita's spine was the photographic process itself. These were not your typical film photographs. These were daguerreotypes, the earliest form of photography, invented in the 1830s. How was this possible? How could daguerreotypes, a process that predated film photography by over a century, end up on a roll of 35mm film developed in 1997? And why were these images interspersed with seemingly ordinary snapshots from the 1960s? A wave of dizziness washed over Rita as she struggled to comprehend the impossible. She felt a strange pull towards the images, a morbid fascination that mingled with an instinctive fear. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Rita embarked on a quest to unravel the mystery behind the haunting daguerreotypes. Her research led her to the local historical society, where she hoped to find some answers about the Native Americans depicted in the photographs. The society's archivist, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was intrigued by Rita's discovery. After carefully examining the images, she identified the tribe as the Lakota, who inhabited the Great Plains in the 19th century. Mrs. Henderson also pointed out a peculiar detail that had escaped Rita's notice. In the background of one of the daguerreotypes, a faint, almost translucent figure could be seen. It appeared to be a man, dressed in modern clothing, standing amidst the Lakota tribe. "This is impossible," Mrs. Henderson whispered, her voice trembling. "It's as if someone from our time was transported back to the 1800s. Rita's heart pounded in her chest. The mystery was deepening, taking on a supernatural dimension that both terrified and fascinated her. She left the historical society with more questions than answers, her mind reeling with the implications of her discovery. Who were these people? How did their images end up on a roll of film developed over a century later? And who was the mysterious figure lurking in the background? As darkness fell, Rita returned to her darkroom, drawn back to the enigmatic daguerreotypes. She felt an inexplicable connection to the images, a sense of responsibility to uncover the truth behind them. As she stared at the haunting faces of the Lakota tribe, a sudden gust of wind slammed the darkroom door shut, plunging her into complete darkness. A cold dread gripped her heart. She was not alone. A wave of panic washed over Rita. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat. The darkness seemed to press in on her, suffocating, alive. She fumbled for the light switch, her fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. It was the canister of film, the one containing the haunting daguerreotypes. As she flicked the switch, the harsh fluorescent light flooded the room, momentarily blinding her. Blinking back the spots dancing in her vision, she scanned the darkroom, her gaze lingering on every shadow, every corner. There was nothing there. No intruder, no lurking presence. Yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. Shaking off the unease, Rita carefully removed the daguerreotypes from the film canister, laying them out on the light table. As the light illuminated the images, a wave of dizziness swept over her, and the darkroom seemed to tilt and sway. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, fighting to maintain her balance. Then, she saw it. The figure in the background of the daguerreotype, The man in modern clothing was no longer faint and translucent. He was clearer now, his features sharper, his eyes staring directly at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. And he was moving. Rita watched in horrified fascination as the figure stepped out of the daguerreotype, materializing in the darkroom with a chilling solidity. He was tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned with an eerie light. He wore a faded denim jacket and jeans, his clothes strangely out of place in the 19th century setting of the photograph. "Who are you?" Rita stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The figure remained silent, his gaze fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He took a step towards her, and Rita instinctively recoiled, her hand reaching for the enlarger timer, the only solid object within reach. "Stay back," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. The figure paused, his head tilting slightly as if studying her. Then, to Rita's astonishment, he spoke. His voice was deep and resonant, with an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down her spine. "You have found me," he said, his words echoing in the small darkroom. "And now, you will help me." Rita's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he emerge from a photograph? And what did he want from her? "Help you with what?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure's lips curled into a chilling smile. "To return," he said, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. "To return to my time." Rita's breath hitched. She realized with a growing horror that this man was not just a figment of her imagination, not just a ghost or a hallucination. He was something more, something beyond her comprehension. He was a traveler from another time, trapped in the realm of photographs, and he needed her help to escape. But how? How could she possibly help a man trapped in a photograph? And what would be the consequences of his return? As the figure advanced towards her, his eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity, Rita knew she had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The haunting daguerreotypes were not just relics of the past. They were a gateway to a terrifying reality, a reality that threatened to consume her. Rita's instincts screamed at her to flee, to escape the confines of the darkroom and never look back at the haunting daguerreotypes again. But her feet seemed rooted to the spot, her body frozen in a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The man from the photograph, now fully materialized in her darkroom, exuded an aura of power and desperation that held her captive. "How?" she managed to croak, her voice barely audible. "How did you come out of the photograph?" The man's lips twisted into a wry smile, a chilling expression that accentuated the hollowness of his eyes. "The daguerreotype is no ordinary photograph," he explained, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "It captures not just an image, but a fragment of the soul. And sometimes," he paused, his gaze piercing through Rita, "those fragments can escape." He took another step closer, and Rita could feel the cold emanating from him, a chilling aura that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. "I was a photographer," he continued, his voice taking on a distant, melancholic tone, "an adventurer, seeking to capture the essence of the Wild West. I stumbled upon a Lakota tribe, their rituals, their connection to the spirit world. It fascinated me." He gestured towards the daguerreotypes on the light table. "I captured their images, their souls. But in doing so, I became entangled in their world, in their magic. When I tried to return to my own time, I found myself trapped, a prisoner of the very images I had created." Rita listened, her mind reeling. This man's story was beyond anything she could have imagined. He was a time traveler, a victim of his own ambition, caught between worlds, his existence tethered to the haunting daguerreotypes. "And you need my help to escape?" she asked, her voice still trembling. "Yes," he replied, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "You found the daguerreotypes. You awakened me. You are the key to my release." "But how?" Rita asked, her fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "What do I have to do?" The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too predatory. "You must take me back," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "Back to the Lakota tribe, back to the moment I was captured." Rita's heart pounded in her chest. She understood what he was asking. He wanted her to use the daguerreotypes, the very images that held him captive, to somehow transport him back in time. But how was that even possible? And what would happen to her if she did? I don't know how," she stammered, her mind grappling with the impossible task. "You will learn," the man said, his voice taking on a commanding tone. "The daguerreotypes will guide you. They hold the key to the ritual, the gateway to the past." He reached out, his cold, skeletal fingers brushing against Rita's cheek. A jolt of fear shot through her, but she couldn't pull away. His touch held her captive, his eyes mesmerizing her, his will overpowering her own. "You will help me," he repeated, his voice a hypnotic whisper. "You have no choice." Rita felt her resistance crumbling, her fear replaced by a strange sense of resignation. She was caught in a web of supernatural forces, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. And the man from the photograph, the time traveler trapped in the haunting daguerreotypes, was the master of this game. The following days were a blur of fear and fascination. The man, who introduced himself as Elias, remained in her darkroom, a constant, unsettling presence. He instructed Rita on the ritual, the intricate steps required to activate the daguerreotypes and open the portal to the past. He spoke of ancient Lakota ceremonies, of spirit walks and vision quests, of a world where the veil between realities was thin, where the past, present, and future intertwined. Rita, initially terrified, found herself drawn to Elias's stories, to his knowledge of a world beyond her understanding. She spent hours poring over dusty books on Native American history and lore, deciphering cryptic symbols and rituals, her fear gradually replaced by a sense of purpose, a need to help Elias, to fulfill her role in this strange, supernatural drama. The ritual, Elias explained, required specific elements: sage, sweetgrass, a piece of obsidian, and most importantly, a willing participant. Rita, despite her initial apprehension, felt a growing sense of obligation, a pull towards the unknown. She gathered the necessary items, her hands trembling as she prepared for the ritual. On a night when the moon hung heavy and full in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across her darkroom, Rita began the ritual. Following Elias's instructions, she lit the sage and sweetgrass, their fragrant smoke filling the air, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly anticipation. She placed the obsidian on the light table, its dark surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. Then, with a deep breath, she held the daguerreotypes in her hands, focusing her gaze on the image of Elias standing amidst the Lakota tribe. She could feel a strange energy emanating from the images, a tingling sensation that spread through her body. Elias, his eyes burning with an intense light, chanted in a language Rita didn't understand, his voice resonating with the ancient rhythms of the Lakota people. The darkroom seemed to vibrate, the air thickening, the shadows deepening. Suddenly, the daguerreotype in Rita's hands glowed with an ethereal light, and the image within it rippled and distorted. A swirling vortex opened within the photograph, a portal to another time, another reality. Elias, his face a mask of triumph, stepped towards the portal. He turned to Rita, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that sent a shiver down her spine. "Thank you," he said, his voice echoing in the charged atmosphere. "You have set me free." And with that, he stepped into the vortex, disappearing into the swirling depths of the daguerreotype. The light faded, the portal closed, and the darkroom fell silent. Rita stood there, her heart pounding, her hands still trembling, the scent of sage and sweetgrass lingering in the air. She had done it. She had helped Elias return to his time. But as the initial shock subsided, a chilling realization dawned on her. Elias's parting words, the strange look in his eyes, the lingering sense of unease, it all pointed to a terrifying truth. She had not just freed Elias. She had unleashed something ancient and dangerous, something that had been dormant for over a century. And now, she was alone, facing the consequences of her actions, the consequences of tampering with forces beyond her comprehension. The haunting daguerreotypes, once a source of fascination, now held a sinister significance, a reminder of the darkness she had unleashed. As Rita stared at the images, now devoid of Elias's presence, she knew her life would never be the same. She had stepped into a world of shadows and spirits, a world where the past could reach out and touch the present, a world where the line between reality and illusion was blurred. And she was trapped in it, forever bound to the haunting daguerreotypes and the secrets they held. And so, the tale ends, leaving a lingering chill even as the rain outside begins to soften. But remember, every shadow holds a story, and every whisper on the wind might be a ghostly echo. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the unknown, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the Rainy Night Storyteller for more tales of mystery and horror. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be undisturbed.